It's January 9th, 2026. Russia is now in the fourth year of its war on Ukraine. Today we want to examine the military situation. I'm Julian Röpke, and you're watching the Build Situation Room. And we'll start again with the situation around Pokrovsk, supposedly been under Russian control for over a month, but the reality is different. The fighting is still going on around Pokrovsk, of course, from both sides. So we're looking at new videos that, on the one hand, show us how Ukraine, within the town, once home to 65,000, is hunting Russian soldiers with its drones. On the one hand here, of course, in small vehicles or cars, and on the other hand also with these small all-terrain vehicles. We can see this vehicle hitched to the back, and the drones that can, so to speak, decide, the operators can choose, go after the vehicle immediately or go after the nearby soldiers instead. It's actually right next to the operators on the Ukrainian side. Every attack is close to their position. They're only a few kilometers apart here, so the Ukrainians can, as we can see here, quickly deploy fiber optic guided drones, prowling the ruined buildings relentlessly, hunting down Russian soldiers. But it's a game. You can of course play it the other way as well. The Russians and their elite units from Rubicon and so on are only a few kilometers away from the Ukrainian forces, and so we also have videos that show us, like in Belgorod, a few kilometers north of here, where they are hunting down a vehicle of the Ukrainian forces in broad daylight. And once again, we can see that first drone that hit often causes an engine problem, resulting in smoke and slightly reduced power. And that's why we usually see the strike from the front, with the Ukrainians getting out of the vehicle alive, because they survived it thanks to the armor and the drone protection, largely still intact overall. And then the Russians just have to keep attacking with more and more drones. We're now seeing the second fiber optic guided drone in action here. Next, apparently because of the explosion, or because the Ukrainians went back to grab something which can't be ruled out, the door's open now. We've got the third fiber optic guided drone operating. That one doesn't appear to have caused any damage. And now the fourth one causes a fire to immediately break out inside the vehicle's interior. We see Lipetsk snowed in, very recent footage. And right there, that burning Ukrainian armored vehicle in the city center. The next footage we see comes from nearby, still in the Donetsk area, but specifically from around the town of Lyman itself. And what we see here is that it's still important to the Russians to keep attacking these kinds of vehicles. Because vehicles like these, tractors, diggers, even trucks, are needed by the Ukrainians to build fortifications, to dig the trenches, and to prepare behind the front, moving supplies and equipment so units can hold their positions. But you can see it straight away. They're also used to build bridges, to put up makeshift bridges. That's why these vehicles, even though they're civilian by nature, are used militarily and become a target for the Russian army that attack the tractors around Lyman, as you can see here. Here we can also see the work that was done. So they made a road, patched it up, whatever you call it, through the forest. And next we actually see a truck here that was still working. It had been trying to build a bridge over this river because the real bridge was blown up by the Russians and is now under attack, so the crew was scrambling to put up a makeshift crossing under fire to keep the route open. Interestingly, the driver is already on the run here. See, the second one has just stepped out too, clearly also fleeing in panic right now. The truck moves and the drone then hits pretty much exactly where it's meant to, so right there just behind the cab of the vehicle, precisely where it was aimed and supposed to strike. It just shows us that the situation isn't only in Pokrovsk, but across the whole area is very difficult, because the front lines are so close together, the various units are packed in very close proximity, and weapon ranges continue to grow steadily. Let's quickly, just for a short moment, look at the scene we just saw. At least the ones from the Pokrovsk area, and we can pretty clearly see where it all took place. So the Ukrainian attacks are right here in central Pokrovsk, and the Russian attacks, for example, like we just saw, can be seen over here in Belgorod. And we can see these are really fairly short distances. Here you can see it from Ryshine to South Pokrovsk. We know the northern part is still fiercely contested. In the southern part, the Russians are either really quick or really secure, and those are only about 3-4 kilometers. Even here, from Belgorod to the first Russian position, it's 3 kilometers. To the next fixed Russian position, it's then roughly 5 kilometers in total distance measured on the ground. And the problem is that all the drones we just saw in action have at least a 10-kilometer range, some even 20, and here you can clearly see that's 8 kilometers. So that means both from the Ukrainian side it's possible to cover this entire sphere, and from the Russian side it's possible to cover this whole area. So in that sense it's really a death zone along the front on both sides. And we'll remain briefly in the Pokrovsk area for a moment and take a closer look at what happens when the enemy moves behind this line. So if the enemy is farther away, and there's a new video of that too, a relatively rare strike, you have to say, by HIMARS, I mean the one delivered by the US, supplied under Biden, not supplied under Trump, 85-kilometer system with guided rockets. Here you can pretty clearly see a resupply convoy, a logistics convoy positioned just south of Pokrovsk. We'll check that on the map shortly. You can see There are many vehicles here, mostly quads, but also other small, somewhat civilian-looking ones scattered about. I don't think there's anything military left in it, and among them are the Russian soldiers, at least 10 or 12 who've already positioned themselves there and apparently think, because you're south of Pokrovsk, not in town but on approach, you're completely safe. This is a fallacy, a deadly one for everyone here involved. We're seeing the Lelika footage here from the Ukrainian drone, and in that moment, just now, the impact of the HIMARS rocket, a single rocket, which, however, packs a lot more destructive punch. It hits precisely, it struck that troop cluster dead on. And that's an absolutely lethal attack. It's shown not just by Ukrainian footage, but by Russian footage as well. Clearly, a few Russian soldiers walked through here just minutes after the attack through this carnage caused by the HIMARS rocket, and have now come to carefully inspect the whole scene and thoroughly document the extensive damage. We're now seeing the aftermath again, how the wounded are being carried off or driven away and promptly given urgent aid by rescuers on site, with medics and volunteers assisting. Now we see it from the Russian soldiers' view, who for whatever reason filmed it and uploaded it online. We must pixelate this. Dead lie everywhere, the same people we just saw standing moments ago. We also see, this is interesting, the vehicles. As I said, all civilian. That up there, an off-roader, and here an ATV. Looks kind of Mad Max, but stuff like that is in fact used by Western forces as well, just not in such a dangerous environment. And you can see this whole thing turned into a real disaster for the Russians who are gathered here because they thought they were safe and completely untouchable. About 20-25 kilometers away from the front, though, the whole thing just didn't work at all. Also that, like I said, we'll still take a quick look at it on the map to see Ukraine has the option, if with their surveillance drones, their recon drones, they can spot the whole thing. If they spot the Russians here in time, they can stop them, even well behind the front. Let's go in here now. The attack that just happened was on this road near Novo-Ukrainka, just a short distance from the village. And what we're seeing is the whole area from Novo-Ukrainka to the front. About 20 kilometers, probably a little more. But the system, as I said, has an 85-kilometer range. So it can be relatively far away, and it struck the Russians, who had been acting very confident there because they were still 5-6 kilometers south of Pokrovsk, and consequently led to that this support convoy and these assault troops here didn't make it to Pokrovsk and didn't reach the front either. We're shifting from short to mid-range. Ukrainian forces are now attacking with mid-range drones. So that's roughly between 20 and 200 kilometers. And we want to look at a few videos released in the last few days that again show these are extremely expensive systems in real-world operational use that were destroyed here. The first one here is a 9S32 radar system. That's the fire control radar of an S300 system, S300. We know that. After the S400, the second most modern and extremely expensive system of the Russian invaders, of the Russian army, we can see that here a very expensive radar system that was just set up, which is actually supposed to work, but which nonetheless didn't result in this drone being spotted here. Here we see it briefly shown again by the Ukrainian army to show what it is. Like I said, the S300 fire control radar, many, many millions pricier still. And next we see further attacks here, including on mobile systems. It's also always interesting that this Tor M2 system right down here only costs maybe 8 million euros, yet it's moving and is even still being attacked right now while on the move by a Ukrainian drone. So that doesn't help the Russians move quickly here either. And then an S350, which is also a radar system for somewhat shorter range missiles, likewise used by the Russian military forces. So again, what we just saw, altogether easily well over 100 million euros in total damage to the Russian army. And that, in just one day, you could say operations by the Ukrainian armed forces with their medium-range systems can pose that threat. Let's watch another video that was shot on Crimea right this very minute. And here Ukraine really managed to pull off a coup that they themselves wouldn't really have expected, to be honest. Here we see various drone attacks. First off, the surveillance drones clearly show an air defense missile launching into the sky. It's a guided anti-air missile aimed either at a drone or that doesn't hit anything here. Not sure, but it does explode on the left side. And now it looks like the Ukrainians were searching, so they basically dipped under the cloud cover here and are now trying to find where that S300 system is. We can now see different units being attacked here, various radar systems, and again some individual soldiers, if I'm seeing it right, near the bunker. So they're searching for the system to take it out, and in the end they think they finally found exactly where it is located. So you think you found S300 system. Here we see it inbound. You can already see it clearly from a distance here. That's the deployed missile launcher. And the drones coming in now, you think you've closed in. It's kind of, a bit obscured. They think it's an S300 clearly visible right there in the open, standing out. So people think they've hit the right system here. But now we see it up close, and analysts have noticed, interestingly, not even within the Ukrainian army, but by war bloggers on both sides. That's not an S-300 at all. What we're looking at is a Polonez system. And a Polonez system, as we can see here in the photo, is an exceptionally rare and very expensive system, not Russian-made at all, but jointly developed by Belarus and China together in close partnership. It's basically a missile system that can fire missiles from 100 to 350 kilometers. Chinese-made, Belarusian-made, or theoretically Russian-made, depending on the specific configuration actually deployed out in the field currently. However, it's a system that can fire guided missiles, something Russia rarely employed to date. We're seeing this proof for the first time now, yes, almost by chance obtained here by the Ukrainian forces, showing they had carried out an attack on Crimea, and that one could then clearly see the aftermath. This Chinese-Belarusian system is now also being used as part of the Russian army's ongoing military efforts against Ukraine at present. So you can see who Russia's allies are, of course, and this was therefore a fortunate break for Ukraine. One, the drone operators themselves hadn't even noticed or fully registered at that very moment or realized right away. Moving from medium range to long range. Here too, both countries remain active, each repeatedly and regularly trying to strike critical infrastructure across the border or even well beyond that 100 to 200 kilometer zone. We'll start with last night's attacks. First, here in the town of Stary Oskol, the Ukrainian army once again carried out a strike on an oil depot in the Belgorod region. We can see eyewitnesses here who filmed the whole thing, and it wasn't the only attack. Ukraine dispatched an entire swarm of drones, striking multiple oil facilities across the wider surrounding area. Traced back to the Russian regime. Here we see the next one in Streletsky Khutora in the Lipetsk region, also only a few dozen kilometers from the Ukrainian border, not far at all really, barely beyond the frontier. We're definitely seeing various attacks that are being carried out night after night now. In this case, even the fire that couldn't be put out is still burning today and shows no sign of letting up or dying down. That means Ukraine is still fairly active here, aiming to fully destroy those oil structures and related facilities. That seems likely to me if you trust the NYT and other outlets, where they're also working with the CIA. So while Trump says, okay, I won't give you weapons or tomahawks, it seems they're saying, okay, but we'll give you the intel, at least so you can keep hitting critical points of Russia's oil and gas industry and thereby, at least to some extent, strategically weaken Russia over time overall. Let's look at this on the map to see what I just mentioned, that this is the medium range, so we're no longer in the short range area, we're already beyond that now. But here we can see it, Stary Oskol, yeah, it would have been fired straight from the border, which is unlikely. Like, what is that, about 180 kilometers from the front? And Streletsky Khutora, like, what is that, roughly 400 kilometers from the front, or maybe closer to 300 kilometers from the front, give or take, as the crow flies, really, more or less, to be honest. That means the Ukrainians are using their drones here to strike. And since we're already on this map, we unfortunately also have to say that the Russians are, of course, up to something similar, doing similar things, attacking strategic targets in Ukraine too, and doing so with an even stronger focus on civilian targets, or rather, infrastructure aiding civilians, here a thermal power plant. You can see Kharkiv, a city of over 1,030,000 kilometers from the border. And this city, or rather one of its thermal power plants, TETS-3, was hit again yesterday by a Tornado-S missile. The Russians themselves proudly say it was a Tornado-S, so about a 120 kilometer range, and it's a guided missile. And here you can clearly see the situation in Kharkiv. So they're still trying, on the Russian side, to cut off both the heating and the electricity, to cut them off directly in Ukrainian cities, to make winter here for the more than 1 million people in Kharkiv as hard and terrible as possible. I mean, in Berlin, we just had it for a few days for about 50,000 people. You just have to imagine the whole thing many times worse and way more intense. So we've got lower temperatures, a lot more people affected here, and an ongoing situation where millions of Ukrainians, because of this Russian shelling, currently have to live in the cold and, of course, in the dark at night, enduring harsh and unsafe conditions. What is Ukraine doing about it? There's relatively little they can realistically do at the moment. We know there are a lot of interception attempts against drones, against those Tornado-S rockets. There's pretty much nothing they can do since Ukraine can't exactly park its modern air defense systems that close to the border. They're mostly positioned around the big cities in the center of the country. What they can do, though, is to mess with Russian reconnaissance operations. And you can see that here in the following video. This is a Gerbera drone. With the Gerberas, you never really know. I think I'll mark them so you can see them better. We're getting close now. With Gerbera, it's unclear. Do they ever carry explosives on board? Very rarely. Mostly it's the Shaheds that have those, or are they used more as mere distractions to divert or overload Ukrainian radars by presenting them with a large number of targets instead? You can only see up close what kind of drone it is, or, and that's sometimes the case, they've got cameras on board and can therefore assist with reconnaissance tasks, providing imagery and intel of the Russians. Cheap looking drone, we saw it too, only about 10,000 to 25,000 euros. but a very versatile drone with over 800 kilometers of range and extremely long reach for the Russian army in practice. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous and why it's a major priority for the Ukrainians here to attack and shoot these drones out of the sky. And now we see it here either in the footage or directly from the interceptor drone's perspective, and next from another drone that filmed the whole thing from above. Here you can see it. We actually had several interceptor drones basically that flew after it, that were following it. The first one, I think you can show it briefly here. For the first one's hitting now, the one we just saw from its own perspective. The Gerbera is crashing now, so at least part of the immediate threat to Ukraine is effectively gone here for the moment indeed. So again, it's up to 800 drones we see per night being used, sometimes during the day too, as we can see pretty clearly here. So it's really just a rather small drop in the bucket, but still an important one indeed. Ukrainians try it hundreds of times a day by every means. Ground-based systems, planes that fly after the Gerberas and the other drones, or even those small interceptor drones as well. What we just saw was, of course, extremely cost-effective because this interceptor drone costs at most 2,000 euros in the daytime version, in practical terms per unit. The Gerbera, as we saw, cost more than 10 times as much. So it's Ukraine's attempt to counter Russia's mass production, which is basically about countering attacks from the neighboring country by mass-producing small, cheap weapons.